going to begin really with Jeremy Corbyn announcing in The Guardian that he's going to be organising a series of monthly meetings in his Islington North constituency. And the idea is, I've been told that maybe this comes from Roger Hallam, who knows, he's going to spread this idea out to other constituencies, and he's not going to launch a party around JC, around Jeremy Corbyn. He's not going to build it top down, because that's a terrible thing to do. He's going to build it bottom up. We wait and see. But more to the point, I suppose completely unsurprisingly, we've had various calls for Corbyn and us on the left in Britain to take our inspiration from France. And so maybe unexpectedly, I haven't looked them out to find exactly, who they are, who's behind it. But the Muslim Vote organization, for example, has specifically called upon Corbyn and the left to emulate the new Popular Front. Its idea is the Greens, the Independents, the left in Britain should get together. And George Galloway, not to be left out, has actually made the call for Jeremy Corbyn himself to become Britain's Mélenchon, the leader of the largest bloc in the new Popular Front. Well, to explore the new Popular Front, I think it's a requirement to at least have a look at the old Popular Front. And of course, what I'm talking about is the Popular Front that was formed in 1936 that didn't just constitute the biggest bloc in the French National Assembly, but constituted a bloc that was sufficient of size to actually become the government. And what we saw in May of 1936 is the left winning the popular vote, and we had Leon Blum, who became prime minister. That was the first, I think, socialist party. I'll come to who the socialist party is, but we'll leave that one to a little bit. But he was the first socialist prime minister in France. He was also, much to the disgust of the far right in the National Assembly, he was also France's first Jewish prime minister. Okay, in terms of his cabinet, it consisted of three political blocs, parties. It didn't include, in terms of the cabinet, the Communist Party, who were supporting the Popular Front government with its votes in the National Assembly from the outside, though. It didn't participate in the cabinet. And the cabinet was divided into 20 ministers from the Socialist Party. That was the French section of the Workers' International Party of the Second International, 13 radical socialists, and 2 Republican or Socialist Republicans. I think this this block of Republicans or radicals is definitely worthwhile exploring. Here was a trend that sort of has its origins in post, how should I put it, First Empire France. I think its formal foundations in 1830. These would have been people who opposed the Second Empire of Napoleon III. And what distinguished them was their defense of republicanism on the one side, but also their willingness to participate in governments with people that they considered liberals. Okay, just to look at the party breakdown in the National Assembly. The radicals, and as I said, there were two blocks of them at least. They got 167 deputies. The Socialist Party, 147. That made them the biggest bloc in the assembly. And then the Communist Party of France, the French Communist Party, got 72 members of the assembly. Worthwhile exploring a little bit about the PCF. In 1934, the leadership of the Communist Party of France had already been, how should I put it, putting out feelers to form some sort of bloc on the left that didn't just include the Socialist Party, but extended to the radicals. This would be something new for a party of the Third International. Historically, that party had championed the idea of a united front of the working class. That was something that was on the agenda of the third and fourth congresses of Comintern, the Communist International. It's true that in the late 20s, early 30s, the parties of Comintern had denounced parties such as the Socialist Party in France, in Britain, the Labour Party, as social fascist. 1934, crucially 1935, represent a break with that line. And it not only represented a break with that line of calling the Social Democrats social fascist, it also included a policy, a strategy of a wider alliance than the working class. And this was in direct response to, first of all, Hitler coming to power. And instead of the Communist Party slogan, "First Hitler, us," coming to fruition, the communists, along with the Social Democrats, along with trade unionists, found themselves in concentration camps. And we also, therefore, had a change of line at the top. And I'm talking about Moscow, and I'm talking about Stalin, and the recognition that Hitler didn't just represent a continuation of the right in Germany, but something qualitatively different, that Hitlerism was out to crush the working class. And indeed, Hitlerism was committed to an expansionist, imperialist war to its east. In other words, what Hitler was writing in Mein Kampf, there was a distinct danger of that being translated to action. And of course, Hitler's Mein Kampf had this idea of living space in the East, conquering the lands of the Slavs, and reducing the Slavs basically to the status of Indians in the British Raj. And so there was a change of policy in Moscow, and communist parties were urged not only to seek out allies in order to expose them. This was the policy of the early Comintern, but no, go beyond that, search out bourgeois and petty bourgeois allies. And famously, at the 7th Congress of Comintern, the last Congress of Comintern, Georgy Dimitrov, who was a Bulgarian communist who fronted the Communist International, introduced the call for a united front, but history, it's gone down in history as the popular front. And he defined fascism, for example, as the dictatorship, the terroristic dictatorship of the most reactionary, the most imperialist, the most aggressive sections of the bourgeoisie. Finance capital in particular was singled out. But what this did, it opened the door for communist parties to reach out to the less reactionary, the less aggressive, the less bellicose sections of the bourgeoisie. In other words, it opened the door to what nowadays would be called anti-fascism, that fascism was seen as the biggest danger, and whatever you do, you need to defeat fascism first. If you didn't defeat fascism, then everything was lost. And so you had to find yourself as many allies as possible if you didn't want to repeat the disaster that we first saw in Germany, and then the disaster that we saw, for example, in Austria. Interestingly, Leon Trotsky at the time, writing about the Seventh Congress of Comintern, compared that decision by the Communist International with August 1914. This is when the majority of parties, the overwhelming majority of parties of the Second International, the Socialist International, voted against the resolutions that they passed to turn war, which they all saw coming, into a struggle for socialism. Instead, what you saw is the German party, the French party, the Labour Party in Britain, you name it, with extraordinarily few exceptions. I think the only exceptions were at the level of party, with the majority section of the Russian Social Democrats and the Broads, or no, it was the Narrows, excuse me, in Bulgaria, that kept true to the internationalist positions of the Socialist International. So Leon Trotsky denounced this shift by Comintern. He didn't want anything to do with popular frontism. He didn't want anything to do with some sort of strategic or governmental bloc with sections of the bourgeoisie. And let's think about it. In 1917 terms, in using Russian politics as our language, what was being proposed was a provisional government. Remember, the provisional government emerges from the collapse of Tsarism. It consists initially of deputies that were elected to the last Tsarist Duma. It was initially headed by one Prince Lvov, but it was supported by the working class parties, specifically those who'd been successful in the elections to the Soviets, unofficial working class bodies also coming from the regiments, coming from the barracks, and later, as the revolution developed, from peasant delegates sent from the countryside. So, yeah, we have in mind, when we talk about the provisional government, the government of Kerensky, a socialist, but it's also worth remembering, surely none of us here can forget, it was the Bolsheviks that condemned the provisional government, not only under Prince Lvov, but under Kerensky, because to keep this government together, Kerensky and the socialist ministers of this government basically agreed that they had to abide by the secret treaties that Tsarism had agreed with Anglo-French imperialism. It constantly put off land distribution to the peasantry, and certainly put off the idea of peace with Germany until Germany basically had done what the Entente demanded, and that is surrender. So the Bolsheviks were in the intransigent camp, and the Bolsheviks denounced the class collaboration of the pro-provisional government socialists, even when there were no bourgeois ministers left. Why? Because of the politics, because of the policy of the provisional government. In other words, the provisional government could consist of 100% socialist ministers, but the Bolsheviks denounced it still as a bourgeois government because of its political aims. And I think we need to remember that when we talk about the 1936 government of Leon Blum. I've already described the ministers, but let's think about colonial policy. The Popular Front government was committed to maintaining the French Empire. The Popular Front government also went along with the idea, bizarrely, but there you are, of adopting a neutral position when it came to the Franco invasion of Republican Spain. Remember, in 1936, you not only saw the election of a Popular Front government in France, you also saw the election of a Popular Front government in Spain. It was similar in Spain to France. The Communist Party supported the election of that government, but when it came to parliament, stood outside that government, at least initially. It was Franco who launched an invasion of Spain. This is Spanish armies, but from Morocco, but with the support of Mussolini and Hitler. And Anglo imperialism basically adopted a policy of neutrality and imposed a blockade. And that is something that France, under the Popular Front government, went along. So, there was a blockade when it came to getting people, let alone weapons, over the Pyrenees. Formally, Stalin and the Soviet Union participated in that neutrality. It didn't want to provoke Germany, it didn't want to provoke Britain, but unofficially, what you saw, of course, is the Communist International organizing the international brigades. Loads of foreign communists went to fight in Spain. And of course, the Soviet Union was actually supplying arms. It supplied aircraft. It supplied generals. It also supplied NKVD agents to hunt down Trotskyists in the Republican camp and kill them. Either way, the position on Republican Spain split the Popular Front government. And so within a year, Leon Blum had been deposed. The Popular Front government continues. I think it's worth emphasizing that the Popular Front government, even before the ministers are sworn in, it actually begins with a massive strike wave by the working class. You have something like 1.5 million workers on strike. Huge number of workplaces are occupied, and in tripartite negotiations with the trade unions, the incoming government, and with the employers, you get massive concessions to the working class. So paid holidays for the first time, big pay increases, secure rights for trade unions to negotiate, guarantees of shop stewards not being sacked. But therefore, it should be emphasized that although the Popular Front begins with really significant advances for the working class, the fact that this Popular Front government coincides with a capitalist stagnation, the great slump, also inflation, these gains when it comes to at least pay are very quickly eroded, and the working class becomes increasingly demoralized with the Popular Front government. And the Popular Front government actually ends up not only adopting a policy of neutrality to their comrades, I use that word advisedly, in Spain, but in let me get the date right, 1939, it actually bans the Communist Party. This is in conditions of the, call it what you will, the Soviet, German, Soviet, Nazi, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The pact that dismembered Poland between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The Communist Party was banned as a warmongering party under those conditions. And what we actually have is a situation in 1940 when German panzer divisions and German army divisions invade France is, in essence, we have the French army prematurely surrendering. In effect, we have the bourgeoisie welcoming in the Germans. And so the idea that you might have that the Popular Front government was the guarantor against France going fascist proves to be delusional. Yes, you had fascist gangs attacking Parliament in 1934, but what you had in 1940 is German occupation, the division of the country into a German occupied zone and a Vichy France, which was agreed to actually by Republican Republican radicals and Socialist Party ministers in what remained of the Popular Front government. Okay, right. Okay, I think a note on the Socialist Party is worthwhile. This party sort of goes back to 1905 officially, but you could take it back to the 1870s, maybe even earlier. But the point about it is, at least when it comes to the 1930s, and I'm not sure, I've not read enough on this, but at least if you look at what Trotsky was writing about this party, he was questioning in the 30s, is it really a working class party anymore? He's sort of thinking out loud, and he's basically saying, look, this is a party of teachers. This is a party of minor officials. This is a party of trade union bureaucrats. This is a party of aspiring politicians. Working class party? There's no doubt about the Communist Party of France. It clearly was a working class party, both in terms of geography, you know, the red belt around Paris, the biggest factories, the biggest workplaces were all organized by the Communist Party. But the crucial thing, really, about the Socialist Party is just like the pro-provisional government parties of Russia in 1917, it's not simply a question of sociology, it's a matter of politics. And the Socialist Party found its natural allies not on the left with the Communist Party, but to the right of them in this rather nebulous Republican Socialist Republican bloc to their right, which in turn found their natural allies in the bourgeoisie. And as I've argued, just like with the provisional government, what you saw with the Popular Front government, it's parties to the right in these coalitions that set the political agenda. So the Communist Party in the 1930s, in the mid-1930s, not objecting to continued French colonial control, for example, in Algeria, continued French colonial control, for example, in Indochina. This wasn't something that came natural to the Communist Party, but it was dictated by the allies of the Popular Front government on the far right. And that was true also in Spain. It's true, it's a general rule. You could almost call it a law of Popular Fronts, because what you get on the right is, okay, then we walk. If you don't agree to our terms, we'll find other allies in order to promote our parliamentary careers to the right of us. We don't want to sell our politics to you. You might be the biggest bloc in the Popular Front, but we have the freedom to walk out. And if you don't agree to our terms, that's exactly what we will do. Okay, I want to turn now to the reaction, and we'll come to the makeup of the new Popular Front. Can we actually call it a Popular Front, for example. I'll come to the reaction to the new Popular Front, and therefore also a discussion of the old Popular Front on today's left. And the first person I will turn to is Ian Birchall. He's a former leading figure in the Socialist Workers' Party. He goes right back to the early days of the SWP and before, when it was the International Socialists, and I think even before that when it was called the Socialist Review Group. Anyway, Ian, writing in Revolutionary Socialism in the 21st Century, bit of a mouthful, RS21 for short, he's got an article discussing the new Popular Front and looking back to the old Popular Front. He says, well, in many countries, the Popular Front line that came from the 7th Congress, came from Stalin, had to, didn't make any impact. And that's true. If we look at a country like Britain, there was no way that the Labour Party was going to go into alliance with the CPGB. The CPGB at the time had no parliamentary representation. If you look at the Popular Fronts promoted by the CPGB, they do come in the variety of an unpopular front. The allies that the Communist Party got on board would be, people like the newly split independent Labour Party that broke with the Labour Party, disaffiliated from the Labour Party with the betrayal of Ramsay MacDonald, who went off to join the National Liberals and the Tories in forming the national government. The ILP disaffiliated from the Labour Party and found itself increasingly falling under the influence of the Communist Party. So the Communist Party could ally itself with the ILP. Yeah, okay. There were various other odds and sods that the Communist Party could ally itself with. And that included, when it came to platforms, when it came to demonstrations and rallies, people, I can't remember his name, but he was called the Red Dean of Canterbury. So that would be the number 2 guy in Canterbury Cathedral. He'd be the guy that runs the cathedral. That's the headquarters of, or the top church of the Church of England. You also had, again appearing on platforms, Michael Redgrave, great actor, appeared in many great films, the father of Vanessa and the father of Corinne, except his politics weren't Trotskyist, they were closer to the official Communist Party. He also had, again appearing on platforms, the Duchess of Atholl. What exactly her politics were, I don't know. Others might well. Either way, the Popular Front in Britain didn't represent anything much in the way when it came to electoral politics, let alone forming a government. So Ian's right on that score, but he gets it completely wrong, because it isn't about forming governments when it comes to the CPGB. What this was is a world term. And I've already quoted Trotsky's assessment that this was the 1914. Well, of course, it wasn't 1914, but nonetheless, a line had been crossed. The official communist parties become universally advocates of class collaboration with sections of the bourgeoisie. And that is significant. So this becomes the common sense of official communism. Previously, if you think about the Second International, there were debates, for example, when a member of, or at least a supporter of the Second International joined a French Republican government. His name was Alexander Millerand. The majority came out against that, and that became the sort of politics of the Second International that were carried on by the politics of the Third International. That what you do, you preserve working class political independence. And when it comes to forming a government, you don't form a government by compromising your program, you actually set your program up, is that this is the program that we will align ourselves with other parties if they commit to carrying out that program. That's absolutely vital. So when the Bolsheviks, for example, formed their first government, other than compromising with the left socialist revolutionaries when it came to their agrarian program, it was the left socialist revolutionaries, the representative, the majority party of the peasant class, as expressed in the Congress of Soviets of Peasants, that adopted or committed themselves to support the Bolshevik program. When it came to the Popular Front in Spain, the Popular Front in France, it was the other way round. And that was true in Britain, that it became the Michael Redgraves, it became the ILP, it became the Red Dean of Canterbury that set the programmatic limits for the Communist Party. So you had minnows, you had personalities setting the program because they could walk. So without them, what's your Popular Front? That's the dynamic of a Popular Front. So I think Ian is both right, but profoundly wrong. And it should also be added that, of course, this becomes something that is carried out in practice. And we get, I haven't really got the time to explore it, but this becomes the practice of governments that are headed by communists in Eastern Europe after 1945, in Korea, in Vietnam, and in China. But of course, the crucial difference is that in China, you have the People's Liberation Army. In North Korea, you had the Soviet Army. And of course, in Eastern Europe, you had the Soviet Army too. We could explore Vietnam and all the rest of it. Suffice to say, the Vietnamese Communist Party was armed. And that isn't the case with France, and it certainly wasn't the case with Spain. You had an army rebellion. In France, you had a sort of army strike when the Nazis invaded, but the bourgeois state remained intact. It's not only Ian Birchall that says that the new Popular Front is good. We also have a number of other forces. So, for example, in Counterfire, that's the organization of Lindsay German and John Rees, former leaders of the SWP. They published one, John Mullen from France, long-time French resident. We also have the same with Anti-Capitalist Resistance, the official section of the Fourth International in Britain, saying we welcome the new Popular Front, and of course the Morning Star CPB do it without hesitation. Also over in America, in Jacobin, Harrison Stetler, June 15th, our article welcomes the new Popular Front. So what's the new Popular Front, I hear you asking? Well, the new Popular Front was put together at incredible speed. I don't think anyone, even including the participants in the negotiations, expected the success that they achieved, but they did put it together and it proved to be successful according to their own agenda. Where did it come from? This is the inheritor organization. I'm not going to do all the initials of an organization called NUPES. So that included the Communist Party, included the Greens, it included the elements of the Socialist Party, it included Mélenchon's France Unbowed, it includes various other odds and sods. But what we note is that NUPES collapses, having been a successful broad front, it collapses, as my understanding goes, definitively after October the 7th and Gaza. And that's not because they support Israel, they don't. It's how do you characterize what happened on October the 7th? Is this a Hamas adventure? Does history begin on October the 7th? Um, should we understand Hamas, or should we simply condemn Hamas? And what you had on the right of Newts is those who insisted on calling Hamas terrorist, in the same way that if you take the BBC, as soon as it mentions the word Hamas, it's got to come in with Hamas isn't officially designated by the British government and many governments in the West as a terrorist organization. Okay, my own take on it is that all states, virtually all historic parties, have used terrorism at one point, in time or another. I've got no problem in saying that Hamas has used terrorism. Is it a terrorist organization, on the other hand? Well, it's not an ISIS. It's not an Al Qaeda. This is a party with a significant social base, in particular, of course, in Gaza, but not only in Gaza. And what you saw, in my opinion, on October the 7th is an audacious military operation, a prison breakout that was born of absolute desperation. I've got no time politically for Hamas. It's a reactionary organization. We don't need to make any excuses for Hamas. Its fighters, yes, of course, carried out completely unnecessary killings. I'm sure they also carried out atrocities. But for us, what we do is we don't begin with October the 7th. We've got to begin with the fact that the Palestinians have been driven to elect such parties. Why? Because of Israeli oppression, because of Israeli colonialism that has been consistently supported by outside sponsors. First of all, Britain, with the Balfour Declaration, and then the dividing up of the old Ottoman Empire, then French imperialism, and finally US imperialism has enabled Zionist settler colonialism that, in my argument, is predicated on getting rid of the native population, in the same way that American colonialism, Australian colonialism, Canadian colonialism is predicated on expelling, marginalizing the native population. I'm not going to go into Israel and Palestine, but suffice to say that this word terrorism served as a shibboleth, that either you went along with this designation and basically signaled to international imperialism that we're safe, we're on your side, we're part of the civilized world, or you put yourself out of that consensus. And quite rightly, in my opinion, Mélenchon and the biggest bloc in Newts, France Unbound, Unbowed, refused to go along with that consensus. So I wouldn't make myself the word terrorist into a shibboleth, but if they're insisting on that, it's quite right that we stand up against that. Okay, let's just do a quick breakdown of the results. I'm not saying this is 100% accurate. It could be 99% accurate, though. This is the results. In terms of the New Popular Front, what we have is FI, that's France Unbound, Unbowed, 78 deputies. Socialist Party staging a recovery, 68 deputies. The Greens, 33. PCF, Communist Party of France, 9. And miscellaneous, 3. Now, of course, what we also need to recognize is we saw a dramatic reversal from the first round in terms of the second round, where tactically, I've got no problem with it, the left came to an agreement with the center, with Macron and his bloc of allies to go for the lesser of two evils. They both went for the lesser of two evils. I think that the the right wing, the old Gaullists, some of them didn't. Either way, we ended up in terms of the results where previously National Rally was first, then the New Popular Front was second, then Macron was third. We ended up with the New Popular Front first, Macron's bloc second, and National Rally third. And of course, that goes hand in hand with National Rally saying we were cheated. No, it's called coming to an electoral agreement. All of these are blocs. National Rally had its allies. The New Popular Front was a bloc of parties that range from, the official Fourth International on one side, right over on this occasion to a previous president from the Socialist Party, Hollande, a neoliberal French president from the Socialist Party. So that's just the nature of politics. And we wouldn't denounce some electoral arrangement. What we are wary of is precisely what followed. And that is, for example, Mélenchon saying, well, I'm the leader of the biggest bloc, which is true. So his IF was the biggest bloc in the Popular Front. So he comes out and says, I should be prime minister. What we get then from the Socialist Party leadership is shut up, quote unquote. Similar sort of response from the PCF, shut your mouth. No, we don't want you as prime minister. We don't want you as our candidate to become prime minister. And of course, if you think about it, what on earth is Mélenchon putting himself forward for? Because if you take the arithmetic of the National Assembly, no bloc has got a majority. So of necessity, if you take one bloc taking the lead when it comes to the government, they've got to find allies outside that bloc. So is Mélenchon seriously saying that he wants to govern either as a minority in a cohabitation regime with a neoliberal, right-moving neoliberal in the form of Macron, or is he going to seek out allies in Macron's bloc? There's nothing on the left for him to align himself with. He has to get allies on the right. And that includes votes of confidence, votes when it comes to budgets, let alone day-to-day legislation. So is he serious? Well, seems to be, but his allies don't want it. And therefore it's interesting to actually look at, for example, the Financial Times when it's discussing who's going to emerge as the prime minister. No one knows. Is it going to be a technocrat? Is it going to be someone from Macron's bloc? Is it going to be someone from the left? And when the Financial Times, for example, comes to discussing it, yes, it lists off various technocrats, various people from Macron's bloc, even talks about someone from the Republican bloc, the former Gaullist party, but it also names Oliver Faure from the Socialist Party, and I wouldn't discount this one, Marine Tollier from the Greens. She seems to be a bit of a darling at the moment, from what I can gather of the mainstream press, the mainstream media in France. And indeed, if you look at one of Ian Birchall's excuses, maybe it's his only excuse, I'm not sure. But anyway, his excuse of why the New Popular Front isn't an old Popular Front, because whereas the old Popular Front included the radicals, I do note in his discussion of this, he leaves off the S word, the socialist word, in the title of both of the major blocs when it comes to the radicals in France. He says that if we look at the Greens, the measures that they propose to protect the environment point in an anti-capitalist direction. My eyebrows raise. Well, we have in government at the moment, Ian, don't we? Next door in Germany, a coalition government, okay, not of the left, but of the center, that include Social Democrats, but includes the Greens, These are Greens that go along with NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. These are Greens that have previously voted in support of NATO intervention in Afghanistan. These are Greens that are quite happy in a capitalist government, because what you had historically is a struggle in the Greens, I think going back to the 80s, I could be wrong here, between what used to be called fundies and realos. And it was the realos, the realistic wing, that won out against the fundies, the fundamentalists. And yeah, in Germany, the realos are now happy in government, and the idea that their program points in an anti-capitalist direction, I would say, is profoundly misguided. There can be, of course, people that we can win from the Greens precisely because of the climate crisis. I readily accept that. But no, in terms of the program of Britain's Greens, Germany's Greens, France's Greens, they point in many different directions. And I could make an argument, a persuasive argument actually, that far from actually pointing to socialism, the Green program could point in an anti-working class direction towards anti-democratic conclusions, i.e. we can't trust the electorate to vote for the program that we need to save the planet. And therefore we've got to get rid of working class rights. We've got to get rid of trade union rights. And what we need is some sort of dictatorship under army generals, under technocrats, who knows? It's just as logical. The Green Party program does not point to anti-capitalism. And again, to reinforce that argument, when it comes to at least the British Green Party, its origins are actually on the far right. And it begins, from my memory, if my memory is right, in an organization called the People Party that becomes the Ecology Party, that was founded by a guy called Edward Goldsmith. I think he was the brother, was he the uncle of the Referendum Party guy. Either way, it comes from the right. And what these people were promoting was a social program that looked back to feudalism. If they had anything, in terms of a fellow thinker, it was our king, King Charles III, the Prince of Wales, as was. He's a feudal Green, and that's what the origins of the Green Party were. Either way, the point I'm making is it's quite conceivable that Macron and the capitalist class go for an attractive Green personality as Prime Minister, and has some sort of centre Green alliance. That would include the Socialist Party. Equally, the Socialist Party could put forward their person to become Prime Minister with the support of Macron's bloc, but would exclude FI. It's all conceivable. Either way, my argument is, of course, there are differences between the 1930s and today. For example, I don't think National Rally is a fascist organization. I don't think it threatens fascism. I don't think we're in a revolutionary situation, but I think France did show signs of being in a pre-revolutionary situation in the 1930s. Either way, I do think that what we're dealing with here is a popular front.
To get the ball rolling, can I ask you a question then, Jack? If we had forces in France that would listen to what we are saying, what do you do in a situation like that, where you have such an undemocratic electoral system? What would we have done better, perhaps? And, should communists never take up government posts, or are there possibilities, are there considerations under certain circumstances where we might actually do it?
Okay, good questions. First of all, rather than starting with the second round, let's start with the first round. And I would disagree with comrades on the left in Britain, such as Ian Birchall, who actually criticize comrades on the left in France who stood their own candidates in the first round. I think that's perfectly valid. Okay, these are candidates of confessional sects, which is unfortunate. So, for example, Loutouvrière stood candidates. The program, the nature of the organization I object to, but standing candidates, a jolly good thing. When it comes to the second round, I think it's perfectly valid to give advice that would include vote against the biggest evil. I have no principled objection to that. I think I'd be crazy if I didn't. So, for example, if you were asked, and if you were in an unenviable situation, and it said, well, you had somebody holding you up and said, well, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill you either by putting a bullet in your head or force you to take slow-acting poison. What would you choose? What would you choose, Jack? I'd say, give me the slow-acting poison. I'm quoting Trotsky here. I hope comrades recognize it. And he said, well, okay, because precisely slow-acting poison, it gives me enough time to organize, to get together, to actually kick this person who's threatening my death. At least I've got a chance. If he just shoots me through the head, I'm dead. So I think that when it comes to the second round, perfectly valid, making a choice between lesser evils. But it's the first round that I think is the crucial one here. So that's why I took us back. Other question, governments. Well, of course, we don't object to holding government seats. We aspire to take government seats, but on our programme. That's the crucial question. Not on a lesser of two evils, but on our programme. So, for example, when it comes to the CPGB, we say we will form a government on the basis of allies, if we can find them, of carrying out the full programme, the full minimum programme of the CPGB. So that means withdraw from NATO. That means proportional representation. That means abolishing the House of Lords, abolishing the monarchy, abolishing the standing army, abolishing the police force. That's the minimum programme. And if you can't agree to that, then we'd rather, to use Marx's phrase, would rather be a party of extreme opposition than a compromised party of government. So, of course, we want government ministers. We want to form a government, yes, but on a definite basis, not some sort of soggy basis. Certainly not on the basis of the new Popular Front government, which was committed. Mélenchon gave in on the word terrorism. If you look at their program, Hamas is described as terrorist. I say a shibboleth word. It doesn't just mean terrorism. It means we are part of the bourgeois consensus. But they also committed to continued French support for Ukraine. And what that means is arms. And France has a very capable arms industry equivalent to the British arms industry. So it's not top dog like America, but basically the Popular Front government, which would include FI, would be committed to carrying out a NATO war, a proxy war in Ukraine. Our position on Ukraine is a pox on both houses, a pox on NATO, but also a pox on the right-wing authoritarian government in Moscow. No time for pro-Russian apologetics. There's nothing progressive, nothing positive about Putin, nothing anti-imperialist about Putin. Anyway, that's the answer. Stand candidates, fight to form a government, but on a principled basis, i.e. the Bolshevik government of 1917 this is the minimum program of the RSDLP, with a little bit of jiggery-pokery when it came to the agrarian program of the Socialist Revolutionary Party.
Thanks. A series of points, one of which is in relation to John. This is just the People's Front was disastrous in France in 1936 to 1940. Okay, the working class won very substantial immediate gains, but rapidly eroded away by inflation, and the upshot is the victory of fascism in 1940 through the betrayal by the French General Staff. The Popular Front is disastrous in Spain in 1936 to 1940. But the consequence of the Popular Front being disastrous in France in 1940 is that the British strategic position in Western Europe collapses in 1940, and the British agree to hand over to the United States in spring 1940. And then the consequence of that is that when Germany invades Russia in 1941 in Operation Barbarossa, the radical defeat of Britain in 1940 means that Britain and the United States come on board with defending Russia, and we get a world popular front, an alliance of the bourgeoisie and the Soviet regime against fascism. And that World Popular Front then leads to the victory of Popular Front governments. And you referred, Jack, to the form of the Popular Front governments all across Eastern Europe, in Korea, in et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what drives that is the fact that the big Popular Front on a world scale, and it's the big Popular Front on a world scale which has the consequence that the Popular Front is seen as the way to go, is the dominant political idea of the left, all down through the 1940s, down through the 1950s, down through the 1960s. It's still seen as the popular way to go, in spite of successive defeats of class collaborationism in the Middle East, in spite of successive defeats of class collaborationism in Indonesia, in various places in Africa, in Latin America, in spite of the fact that the popular fronts in the immediate post-war period in Western Europe restored capitalism, were simply a route to shorten. Then the communist parties were kicked out of the governments, and it remains the common sense of the left. The reality is that these comrades of the left who are sort of claiming this popular front is not a popular front is precisely the result of the fact that the official communism is the common sense of the left, including of organizations which think of themselves as Trotskyists, including of the official Fourth International, including of the Socialist Workers' Party and its international socialist tendency. They create a false image of the People's Front in 1936, which represents the Radical Party as being the equivalent of the British Liberals, when it's actually a party of the peasantry and the small towns. John Smithy, dialectic. I don't think we can take it that dialectic will automatically mean that the rise of the far right will lead to a polarization and the rise of the far left. It's certainly true that there's a tendency for poles to pull apart, but I think it's quite possible. Dialectic is at the end of the day about processes of change. It's about a way of grasping processes of change, and there are processes of change at work. But those processes of change at work can perfectly well wind up with the creation of a capitalist equivalent of the Roman Empire or the Tokugawa shogunate or European absolutism. And at the moment, the dominant tendency appears to be to the right. We can hope, but in a sense, the paradox is that the commitment to the People's Front idea carries with it the commitment to a managerialist way of organizing the left in order to secure the left hanging on to and not pissing off and not driving out the right, the socialist parties, and so on and so forth. But that managerialist, as long as the left continues to be managerialist, it can't get even as far as the interwar socialist parties or the interwar Labour Party, which none of which was as managerialist, as popular frontist as the modern left is after 70 years of popular frontism. 70 years since 1941, 80 years of popular frontism since 1941. Will John again, will a broad left in Britain, would a broad left in Britain work? Well, the reality is actually the left in Britain just keeps imitating what seems to be fashionable in the continent of Europe. And we had it with the Left Party. Left Unity was an attempt to imitate the German Left Party. My God, what an example to imitate. The social forums was an attempt to imitate the European Social Forum, which was Rifondazione. So this sort of tailing whatever's the latest fashionable thing. And again, the problem that it blocks you. It sort of guarantees that the dynamic towards the right will continue.